and welcome back to my YouTube channel again. As you can see, this week my hair is slightly different. I did a brave thing and I cut it myself. As you can see from the title, today's topic is all about how to tell your family that you're pregnant. I'm going to give you a few tips and hints to help along the way, as it's a very nerve-wracking thing. You tell your family you're pregnant when, one, you might be a young mum like me, or two, it may be that your family are not too keen on the idea. I'm also going to tell you how I told my family. You've obviously gone through the pros and cons of having this child, and you've decided that you want to keep the baby, so congratulations. I think one of the main points for me about not having Ava was that I would have to tell my family. That was the main thing. I was scared to tell my family. And in my head, I was going to put this off for as long as possible. But I would avoid doing that because it's a massive weight on your shoulders that you need to let off. And once it's done, you feel so much better. So my first tip would be, number one, to not put it off. As soon as you've decided that you want to keep this baby, the best thing to do is to tell your family. I actually told my family quite early on, so instead of me telling my mum actually guessed, which I don't really know how she guessed. Maybe she heard a conversation, I'm not sure, but I was about 6 weeks pregnant at the time, and I was sat on the sofa in the morning thinking to myself, oh God, I've got all these people to tell, I'm so nervous. And she came up to me and she sat on the sofa and said to me, Sophie, are you pregnant? And I just looked at her and I go, yeah. And me and my mum are really, really close. We're more like sisters. So it was so nice to speak to her. Obviously, she was telling me the pros and the cons of being a young mum, as she was a young mum herself. I wouldn't necessarily say that she didn't want me to have Ava, but it was more that she wanted me to understand the sacrifices that we would have to give up before we jumped into having Ava. And I'd already gone through this in my head. I knew I wanted to keep her. Bailey also told his mum at the similar time, and I know that she was really understanding, and I felt comfortable to speak to her as well, which is lovely. But coming on to my second rule is you need to understand how your parents or family members may react and let it happen. This is something new for them. Although you may have gone through things in your head, they are going to want to express their opinions to you. So you have to let them let everything out. It's the only way that they will get it off their chest too. I'm not 100% sure if my mum hadn't asked me how long it would have been before I told her. I reckon it probably would have been about 8-9 weeks maybe, because I was kind of plucking up the courage to tell her. I was actually more worried about telling my dad than my mum. I'm not sure why, but with my dad, I messaged him the night before when I was staying at his house. I said, please can I speak to you tomorrow? And this is probably not the best thing to do, because I know that my dad, he said after that he was up all night worrying what it could be and overthinking everything. So maybe don't do that. That's an advice that I would suggest not to do. Maybe just say on the day, can I speak to you, rather than telling him the night before. I think this is because I was so nervous and I just had to send a text to be able to prepare myself. So there is no going back. I had to tell him then. And we went to Costa the next day at about 2 in the afternoon. So I had all morning to be a bit scared and overthink. And I sat down with him and I just said, I am pregnant. And his reaction was not great, but it wasn't awful. Luckily, I've got quite understanding parents, and they're not the type of parents that will shout at me. They sort of just talk to me and explain how they feel, which I let him do. And I also explained my opinions as well and how I was happy to go ahead with everything. Both my parents and both Bailey's parents were quite young when they had both of us, so they sort of know the ins and outs of being young parents. My third suggestion would be possibly to speak to someone in public. I think this just helped me to relax a little bit more. I just feel like it's less awkward in public. Obviously I didn't have that opportunity with my mum, but with my dad I did, and I felt like it helped. It made it easier to speak to him. You can try this. Maybe it wouldn't do for you, but it did for me, so that's my advice. Bailey's dad also found out similar time to when my dad found out, and he was also very understanding. He just told us how he felt, and we explained that everything was going to be fine. For example, me and Bailey have been together for a long time, and that we would try our very hardest to make sure we always work. One thing that definitely helps with letting your parents understand how you feel is to let them speak first. Listen to what they have to say, because they will respect you more for listening rather than butting in and backchatting whatever they have to say, because that will just end up in an argument. It will cause more conflict. It then creates a negative atmosphere, negative vibes, and you don't want that when you're pregnant at all. Sometimes parents just need a little bit of time as well. I know that after I spoke to my dad, I sort of wanted to give him a little bit of time to process it all, because obviously it's a big thing. At the age of 38, he became a granddad. So I know that although we're young parents, he's also becoming a young granddad, and the same as my mum, becoming a young grandmother too. I would also suggest not to do this over text. It is 100% better to speak to your family in person. Text, just, you can't fully express yourself on text, and emotions aren't as real. They're sort of interpreted differently, so you may come across different to how you're attempting to come across, and it's just so much better in person, because you can have that conversation and have it done with, and not sit there feeling anxious, thinking, have they read that text, have they not read that text, and maybe that person wouldn't reply and you'd feel even worse. Whereas if you just have the conversation in person, you'll feel much better afterwards. If worse came to worse, I always think you should write a letter. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but if you have really, really bad confrontational skills and find it really hard to speak to your parents, or for whatever reason, I always think a letter is always a good way to do things. You need to be prepared for how you're going to say things and when you're going to say things. Maybe a few days before, just think to yourself, right, I'm seeing my mum or my dad on Friday, or both, and I'm going to sit them down and I'm going to speak to them. And you need to prepare what you're going to say, just so that you don't get scared and feel on edge. You know what you're going to say. The other thing is to make sure when you sit them down, you need to be calm and collected and just get to the point. Don't start beating around the bush. Just literally say what it is. Let them react how they want to react, and then express your own opinions. In my head, when I told my parents, I thought they're never going to be happy with it. But further down the line, everything was forgotten about. Everything was wonderful. My parents absolutely adore Ava, and Ava adores them too. There's no negativity towards us having Ava at this age. Everything is completely normal, and that brings me on to my final point, is to say that although things may be a bit difficult at the beginning, just know that eventually your family will come round and everything will be absolutely normal by the time you have your baby. I know I have been very fortunate with my family. They have been very understanding and not argumentative towards this situation at all. But I know that some parents may not be quite as understanding. So if you do find that you're in a difficult situation and maybe a violent situation with your parents, I would 100% recommend having someone there to mediate and maybe have somewhere to go and stay. I hope this video has been useful for you, and good luck telling your parents. Please like, subscribe and share.